this is not accessible at all. Imagine trying to get into the building with a wheelchair. So unless there's an elevator inside, you're not getting up there. Let's take a look at a maybe better, more accessible staircase. This one it's an outdoor staircase and it has ramps zigzagging all the way from the right to the left, or the right to the left, and I think it happens about 9 times before you can make it all the way up there. So it seems more accessible and it seems really pretty. This is actually not accessible at all. It's super dangerous. There's not a safe place for you to stop, right? There's no ramps for you to safely stop. So again, I feel like we're getting closer but not there yet. Let's take a look at this beautiful example, right? This is definitely accessible. There's a nice built-in ramp at the side of the building that anybody can take up and then make their way into the entrance. Though this is great, this is definitely requiring people who need the ramp to have an alternative, a different experience than anybody else who could just walk up to the entrance. So again, I want you to start thinking about this. There's different ways to make things accessible, but we want to have the best experience for everybody and have everybody feel welcome and have an amazing experience. So here we have some awesome ramps. The first one, again, something went wrong, right? The design might have gotten it right, but something happened in the implementation that made a huge mistake. So here we see an awesome ramp. It seemed like it was gonna work, but they had a permanent street pole in the middle of the ramp. You cannot make this, you cannot make it through with your wheelchair. This next example is a nice, pretty simple ramp, but they added this giant flower pot in the middle. That's really heavy to move, especially after it's been watered. You're not moving that out of your way. So again, you might have the best intents, but really you have to make sure that your designers and your engineers are working together to make sure that the intended design and the intended use for what you're building actually comes through in the final product. Let's take a look at this other ramp. This one's pretty simple. There's a couple of steps next to a small ramp leading right into the entrance of the building. Now this is great, but still kind of creating a different experience. So I wanted to talk about something called inclusive design, which is when you're designing things that work for as many people as possible. So let's take a look at this awesome example where there are no steps to enter the main entrance of the building. So anybody going into this building is going to have the same experience. You're creating this awesome, universal design, inclusive experience. So now let's start moving these ideas into the web, right? How do we make sure that, like in our physical spaces, we're creating our content in such a way that everybody can access it? And just like we wouldn't build a 10-story building without an elevator, there are some things that are best practices that we should keep in mind when building digital content. So let's talk about why this is important. Well, the web was fundamentally designed to work for everybody, regardless of people's hardware, software, language, location, or ability. So in order to do this, we have to keep a few things in mind. Now, there are going to be a lot of things that we can talk about for accessibility, but I wanted to focus on a couple of, like 3 main things, right? Number 1 is when you're thinking about making your content more accessible, you want to first take a step back and really gain insights into people's experiences. What tools are people using to navigate your web, like the web and your content? How do those technologies interact with your content, and how are people using them? So let's talk about some types of disabilities and some of the technologies that they might be using. So people who might have motor disabilities might be using things like voice recognition, eye tracking software, mouth sticks, headphones, adaptive keyboards, single switch access, which are some of the examples are shown here. Then we might have somebody who's experiencing visual disabilities. They might use screen magnification or screen readers or braille displays to access your content. And I'll go over a couple more examples, but we also have hearing aids, right? We could embed sign language, add captionings, transcripts. Same thing for cognitive disabilities. They might be using cognitive aids or communication tools, right? So there's a lot of things that people can use to interact with your content. So taking a step back, I wanted to share this with you today, but in the interest of time, I just shared some links of some demos. And again, I posted the QR link here to the slides. But these demos will walk you through how does somebody with a screen reader navigate the web? What are some of the techniques and tricks that they use to navigate the webs? Can they go through all of your headings, for example, and go navigate your site through all of the headings or the landmarks, how you section your website, right? How do they navigate through the links, through the buttons, through any interactive elements that you've added? So once you have a better understanding of the tools and how people use those tools to navigate your content, I highly encourage you to adopt some accessibility best practices. And let's talk a little bit about a couple of them today. And you really have to understand how your design decisions impact the end user. So luckily, W3C has created a set of guidelines to help us make our content more accessible. And I have a link here called Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Now, these guidelines are broken up into 4 main guiding principles, so kind of 4 categories. Number 1 is perceivable. And this really talks about your users being able to perceive the information that's being presented. So you want to make sure that it's not hidden or that it's not invisible to their senses. You also want to make sure that your content is operable, meaning that the interface or controls or anything that's happening in your site should be functional and usable, and you shouldn't be requiring an action that somebody cannot perform. They also talk about making sure your content is understandable so that your information, operation of the interface is understandable, meaning that it shouldn't go beyond somebody's understanding. Somebody shouldn't be stuck because they don't know how to use your content or how to interact with your content. And of course, they talk about making sure your content is robust so that users are able to access your content as technologies advance. And this one's a little bit more technical, but you also want to make sure that your developer and engineers are using the newest technologies available and make sure that the browsers have the support of the things that they're using so that assistive technology also is in line with that, those technologies that are supported by the browsers. That way, the content will remain accessible longer. So let's talk a little bit about some easy tips and tricks since we only have 15 minutes today. So one easy win is looking at our text alternatives. So the guidance here is to provide text alternative for any non-text content, meaning images, right, media. So this will help, this text can be rendered by the assistive technology. So again, it kind of gets sent to your browser sends it to the assistive technology, and at this point, anybody can access and understand what this image that you're putting into your content is about. And here's some resources that might help you decide what the best option is for your specific image. But I want to kind of take a step back and talk about this one a little bit, and here's an example. So here I have an awesome, cute puppy, right, kind of rolling around the grass, and there's a roll of toilet paper behind him. So I might have a website that sells toilet paper, and this might be my toilet paper puppy campaign. I don't know why, but this is what I've decided to go with. And in that case, it might be fair to say that the description of this image in that instance would be something like puppy rolling on the grass with Scott's super soft toilet paper, because that's what I'm selling. That's the intent of me adding this image here. Another alternative would be, what if I instead was creating a website for a pet adoption agency, and this was our photograph. Instead, I might call it something like adorable, happy puppy rolling on the grass, ready to be adopted. So you see the same image, but completely different meanings, and it kind of goes back to our kind of business intent. Why did we include this image? What feelings are we trying to emote from our users? Create that equivalent experience for everybody. If somebody cannot see the image, they should get that same feeling, the same like understanding of the image. So moving on from images, let's talk a little bit about color. One thing that we want to make sure is that we're using the right colors and that the colors have a high enough contrast so that people can perceive them. This can help people who have low vision or who cannot see different ranges of color. And here are, again, a couple of resources to help you test for colors or choose color or look at different color combinations. So let's look at an example of colors. So here I have different color wheels. The one on the way to the left is, you can see all of the color views. So we see reds, yellows, purples, greens. But as we move to the right, I have examples of the same color wheel with different types of color blindness. So as you can see, in some of these color wheels, I cannot see reds or greens. In some of them, I cannot see yellows, right, or blues. So again, this kind of highlights why you might not want to rely on color alone to show to share some information. So here's another example. I have a field of flowers and I have some greens, pinks, yellows, reds. And as we move to the other examples of different kinds of color blindness, I might not see the greens, I might not see the reds, I might not see the yellows. So when we're looking at our digital content, sometimes we have instructions like click the bright red button. somebody might not see what the red button is, right? So think about that and think about the words and the language that you're using. And instead of describing things by color or providing information with color alone, you could say, hit the red submit button. People can read what button says submit, right? So like be specific, be very clear, and think about your audience and what, how they are going to consume your content. Another thing to think about is your content structure. The guidance here is make sure that you're sectioning your page sections, your content, in ways that make sense, and make your headings really descriptive of each section. So this will help people understand the information that's on the site and how it's organized. And again, here are some resources for you. But some people with assistive technology will navigate your site through those sections that you've highlighted, and I'll go to the next slide. But when you're creating good heading structure, it creates this hierarchical order for your page. And same thing with landmarks, which we kind of see an example of here, where you could have a heading section of your page, you could have a navigation section, your main section where all of your main content lives. So again, you could use this trace to help people find your content a lot easier on your site. Next up, this is the last kind of tip I'll leave you with, but keyword navigability. You want to make sure that all the functionality that you have in your content is operable by keyboard or keyboard interface. That way people who use keyboard or keyboard interfaces, which is very similar to like most assistive technology out there, if it's working for keyboard, chances are that it's working for assistive technologies. But you want to make sure that they're not relying, that your users are not relying on eye-hand coordination to be able to use your sites. So this includes, like, if you have a form, right? You want to make sure that everybody can answer all of the questions in the form. Everything should be able to, as you're testing with your keyboard, you should be able to tap to all of the inputs, to all of the interactive elements, all your buttons, all your links, all your accordions, all your widgets and components, right? Make sure that anything that's functioning should be, you should be able to interact with it with your keyboard alone. And here's a link that kind of shows you some testing techniques and some component patterns that you can follow if you're an engineer or a designer. You should look at some design best practices that they have highlighted there, but to kind of work with what is the expectation that people expect from a keyboard perspective on some components. Like when we're looking at accordions or tabs, how do people expect those to function with their keyboard? All right, so then the last thing is, now that you know this, you know what tools people use, you're understanding the best practices through that web content accessibility guidelines. Now it's time for you to integrate accessibility to all your parts of your workflow. So really this means collaborate with your disability communities to create accessible digital content, and make sure that you're including accessibility best practices in all of your parts of your product development lifecycle. This includes UX research, your design phase, development phase, testing, and the more voices, diverse voices you have in there, the more problems you're going to catch and fix before release. And that's what we're aiming for, right? We want to have the best experiences for everybody that we can do. So with that, I will leave you. If you have any questions or want to talk more about the topic, I'm always happy to talk more about accessibility. Please feel free to reach out, and thank you all so much.